Welcome to a new Ask Me Anything session with Dr. Lee Hawkins, where he will be answering questions on exploratory testing. We would like to thank and give a huge shout out to BrowserStack, our exclusive sponsor for all community events and premier sponsor for conferences.
So, welcome, Lee. Thank you very much for joining us today. And a very big shout out to our sponsor, BrowserStack. They are constantly helping us, supporting us to do the things that the test tribe has a mission and vision to do, to bring back the glory of software testing craft and co-create smarter, confident testers across the world. So a big shout out for BrowserStack because they are supporting all the events that we are conducting, and they're a huge support for us. With this, time to introduce Dr. Lee Hawkins. Lee is a test practice lead at SSW, and I think when I was reading his bio and I was reading his introduction that is provided to our team, I was fascinated by when he written the book An Exploration of Testers, and coordinated the crowdsource navigating the world as a context-driven tester ebook, and it was phenomenal. And thank you, Lee, for authoring that book. I think you have done it in different iterations, right? And it's constantly updating. So I will get, I soon find an opportunity to read that. But thank you for that. And Lee, you have also co-founded Team Meetup in Melbourne. You organized Australian Testing Days in 2016, and I'm very excited to see your EPIC Epic Testability Academy. So maybe we can talk after this conversation on the exploratory testing to some extent. With that, I would just give me one moment. I would give the stage to Dr. Lee Hawkins, and again a big shout out to our sponsor BrowserStack, who is helping us to conduct all these events. So I'm stopping sharing now, and before we start with the questions, I have one question to start, and that begins with first few letters of exploratory testing. So from your perspective and from your experience, what does it mean to explore?
That's a great place to start. I did actually look up a dictionary definition of explore just today, actually, for an unrelated reason. But some of the definitions say things like to travel through an unfamiliar area in order to learn about it. So I thought, wow, that's so directly related to what we want to talk about for exploratory testing, right? So a lot of what you think about when you're exploring something is to learn about something new, right? It's this is where the very idea comes from of exploring new territory or mapping out a new area. So and we're often tasked with doing this when we're testing software, right? We don't always come armed with great information about the thing that we need to test. So we do need to sort of navigate around it for ourselves and take this more sort of exploring idea of finding our way through an application in that learning mode, to learn about what the application really looks like and what it does, rather than having some sort of predefined way of getting from one spot to another. So I suppose the opposite would be, having a route planned out for you on Google Maps or something that says, to get from here to here, you go here, 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 and do this, right? But often in the task of testing software, we don't know what that route should look like, and we deliberately might not want to follow that route anyway. We want to explore, right? So I think it's that idea of learning our way through and basing where we go next on where we've just come from, right? We're not following a predefined path, so we take some path through what we're doing, and then based on what we've learned so far and where we are, then we can decide to take a different path. So I think the naming is perfect for what we actually do as software testers when we really are sort of both learning an application and trying to find the more subtle problems in the application under test. So we're not just following predetermined paths over and over again, because we're unlikely to find anything new. Like we wouldn't have discovered Australia if we kept looking for America. Right? So,
Right. Makes sense. And thank you for answering that question. And the other question I have as a follow-up question, because when we try to define something that it means this, right? We also try to define what it doesn't mean. So from your perspective, what exploration is not, or what it is not?
well, what it is not, I think it is. I kind of hinted at that before. I think if you've got a pre-planned route from A to B, then you're not really exploring, right? You're following a set of steps or a set of directions that tell you how to get from one spot to another. In testing terms, you'd be taking particular steps to put the software in a particular state, do the next steps to get into the next state. So you've planned out in some sense the way you're going to get from one spot to another, or to get from one function to another. So you're not in that explorative idea of learning new things as you go along. You've decided what you want to do up front, and you're taking the steps to get from one point to another. So I think you could think of it as saying, if I'm not really learning anything through the process, or learning anything new through that process during my testing, then I'm probably not exploring. I'm probably following a predetermined path where we have some expectation about everything that's going to happen along the path already. So we're not diverting from that plan. We're following a predefined set of steps, and not really learning much new along the way.
Okay. So what I understand is that as long as it is, okay. So before I conclude anything on these answers, right? Let us take another question which popped up in my head. What are different type of explorations, and very specific to software testing, that you would like to tell the audience today, that hey, along with the definition that you gave, that not chasing or not looking for a predefined path, but looking for the discoveries in the system, subtle issues, and not fixating to a predefined script. It's about discovery and learning about the product, right? But not very fixated to the predetermined path. You may have a starting point and ending point, maybe, but not exactly from here to here and here to here, right? Because in that case, you are not discovering something new, as you gave Australia America example, right?
Mm-hmm.
Now, following up on that part, what are different type of explorations specific to software testing, if there are any? I mean, when somebody says, I am doing exploratory testing, what exactly we should have in our head? Okay, this person is doing this, or these set of activities.
Great question. It's I think this is one of the more difficult things to describe to people that are not familiar with exploratory testing. So I think we'll probably get into this and answer other questions, but there is this idea of sort of scoping out that exploration in this form of a charter. So maybe if no question comes up on this, we should come back to this point anyway. And that one of the ways of sort of directing exploratory testing is through this idea of a charter, which is basically a mission, right? So what are we trying to do in this exploration? It's not like, the explorers didn't set out and say, we're going to explore the entire world, right? That they had a mission. We think there's some big landmass over here. We're going to go and try and find that and see what it looks like. And we need to do the same thing for exploratory testing to sort of shape and put some boundary around what we're trying to do, right? So we want to explore something to find some information in some form, right? So it's not just this totally open-ended, we're just going to wander around and hope we find something interesting. So set in some charter around that. And some people have done sort of very specific things around this, like James Whitaker, for example, has come up with this idea of testing tours. which can be a useful sort of device for coming up with ways to start those journeys of exploration. So
Yeah. Mhm.
hopefully we can provide some links in the notes to this or something.
Right. And I think it was James Whitaker who first came up with the Turing heuristics very predominantly in his book on exploratory testing, right? He was, I think, as far as I read his book, he was primarily focusing on the Turing thing when he was explaining the exploratory
Yeah,
testing. Is that correct?
yeah. That's one of the things that he's known for, is putting this naming around tours, right? And they can just be a useful device as a place to start. So
Hmm.
I think if anyone's unfamiliar with those, we can provide a link, or just look up James Whitaker
Okay. All
testing
right.
tours.
All right.
You can find that.
Okay. Okay. So let me start taking the questions from the audience.
Yep.
Very interesting question came up, which is from Pramod Das. Let me see if it is okay. I'm showing it on stage, and Pramod is asking: is exploratory testing a testing strategy, or is it more of a training learning strategy? If it is viewed as a testing strategy, how is it used in story or something that is bound by a scope testing?
Okay. If I'm answering a different question to what you intended, Pramod, you can let us know. But so I don't think exploratory testing is a testing strategy, as I see it. I view exploratory testing as an approach to testing. Like, it's a way we go about testing. So a testing strategy is something different, I think. But as an approach to testing, um, I, I I don't see it as primarily a training or learning thing. It is actually an approach to testing the software. So that's important to note. So if we use an exploratory testing as an approach to the way we do testing, then you can apply this approach to whatever scope of thing it is. So if you're tasked with testing a user story, that's one level of scope, a fairly small scope thing typically, or you can apply the same approach to a collection of stories and a feature, or even a whole product if you want. So I don't think the scope necessarily constrains the use of exploratory testing as an approach. But of course, the kind of testing you might choose to do will be quite different depending on that scope. So if you are starting from a user story, for example, you might, some kind of agile type world, you might have acceptance criteria on the story, right? So they might provide you with a starting point for sort of ideas of what you need to check first in that story, and then you can start to broaden out from those acceptance criteria to think of other test ideas. But I think as an approach, it applies whether the scope is small like a story, or whether it's a higher level scope if you're tasked with diving in and testing a whole product from scratch, for example.
Awesome, great. I hope Pramod, the answer from Lee uh, helps you understanding, and you got your answer. Then let's take another question, which is from Matt Lewis, and here's the question: how do you estimate the time required for exploratory testing?
Okay, another excellent question. I think you can take the word exploratory out of that question, and it's still a tricky question, right? So, how do we estimate the time required for any type of testing that we do? Obviously, there've been some sort of traditional approaches to this, and that we'd write test cases and estimate how much time each test case would take, and then have a plan of all the test cases and add up all the time for all the test cases, stuff like that. But that was rarely an accurate way of estimating the time for the entire test ever either. But for exploratory testing, the way that I've found most useful, I suppose, in coming up with estimates is again related to this idea of charters. So having charters for sort of scoping out the exploratory testing that you would tend to do and breaking those the sort of execution of that test effort into sessions. So there's something called session-based test management, which is a way of managing, well, it's a way of managing any sort of testing actually, but I found it particularly useful for managing exploratory testing. So we split up the test effort into sessions, which are short periods of uninterrupted testing. So one of the ways of estimating is to, look at the charters for the test effort that you're trying to cover, and then having a rough estimate of the number of sessions required for the charters and totaling that effort up. So I would defer to someone else on the call actually here for a really good test estimation method, and that guy is Rob Sabrin, who's done some nice simple test estimation methods for this kind of work in, I believe, unpublished in Tea Time with Testers. So I would encourage people to look at his work in this as well. But yeah, really for me, that's the only approach that I've used to test estimation around exploratory testing is using session-based test management. So if you're unfamiliar with that, again, you can fairly easily find the original work on that, which comes from John and James Bark, session-based test management.
Okay, thank you. Thanks, Lee. Then there's another question from Shirlene. Again, an interesting question, and I'm putting on stage.
Mm-hmm.
With so many other requests and commitments that testers have during the day, how do you set aside time to explore? Is there some trigger clue that you have that signifies something needs more exploring?
Interesting question. So the question implies that that there's this other testing work that testers do that isn't exploratory testing, right? And this is a common thing that I see actually, is that a lot of organizations see exploratory testing as something you do after you've done all the other testing. Whatever
I think, you're touching a very delicate juncture of the day-to-day testing activities where, I'm sorry to stop you, but I mean, this question is important because how certain organizations or modeling techniques perceive exploratory testing to be happening after everything is done, kind of, So please continue. It's an important juncture. Please.
It is, and it feels like a lot of organizations still misunderstand exploratory testing, so they see it as being this other type of testing that you do once all the sort of proper testing has been done, whatever they think of as being the proper testing, whatever testing methodology they prefer. So, but the question implies that that's the case here, so that you're doing all this other stuff, but then you need this other time to actually do exploratory testing. So, if that's the case, then you might have to find some time by stealth to do the exploratory testing stuff. And I've certainly been in situations where that's been the case, and it can be a very useful thing to sort of add on that exploratory testing part outside of like the work that you're expected to do in the proper testing, because you will reveal all these problems that weren't revealed by the other types of testing they were doing. So over time, you might be able to sort of shift the thinking of the people asking you to do all that other stuff to free up some more time for the exploration that is actually finding more of the issues than this other type of test effort that they're focused on. Maybe I've misunderstood the question, but it sounds like that's the kind of environment where exploratory testing is is like a separate thing or something that you only get to if you've got some free time after all the other stuff's done, which is not ideal, I don't think.
I think the similar interpretation I have that there is a segregation between the exploratory nature of testing itself versus saying, hey, certain or a large piece of testing is not exploratory itself, right?
Yeah.
So if
Yeah.
that is the segregation, I mean, I think yes, you're right. There's a misconception in the head of people or the org, and I think this is where such sessions help everyone. That if we start thinking that testing is not largely exploratory, just based on some models or some thinking, that we may be at the loss at the end of the day, right? Okay.
Yeah, for sure.
Yep.
And I think it is. It's part of our responsibility to sort of educate people about that.
Educate
Yeah.
the
So
teams
that,
and all these things, and maybe kind of asking, hey, can you show me the model of what you mean by non-exploratory testing? Okay, and
yeah.
can we look into this and how is it helpful for us? So thank you.
And sort of this misnomer that
Yep.
exploratory testing is this random ad hoc,
A random ad hoc, exactly.
just playing around stuff,
Yeah,
which it isn't. Which
monkey sitting on the
yeah,
keyboard, right, and
yeah.
just banging
So,
the keys and all this stuff.
so then its credibility has been sort of pushed down. So it's not surprising that organisations don't think they should do
Right,
it.
and I think it was one of my question as well. I have not put it that it is a possibility that even testers might misunderstand, may mishandle the notion of exploratory testing
Oh, for sure.
that brings down their credibility. You
Yes,
know.
for
So
sure.
thank you.
Yep.
I hope, Shirlene, that answers your question. But if you have follow-up questions, please do post here. Um, Let me ask another question. Okay, so Rob Saborin asking a question, and here's the question. Lee, please describe your favorite bug that you personally found in a commercial project, and let us know why it is your favorite bug. Thanks, Rob said.
Okay. Indeed. Thanks, Rob Sab. Yeah, my favourite bug is. I wonder if I've already told Rob this story before. But my favourite bug would certainly never have been found if I was following test scripts or a very formal approach to testing. And you could argue it was an accidental discovery. But the situation was that I was involved in projects early in my career where I was following formal test cases, a very documentation heavy test approach, which actually meant that we all had to do lots of extra hours to fill in all the paperwork and things. So anyway, I was working late one day in the office. There was hardly anyone around, and testing some feature or other, and I could hear this strange noise coming from my computer. This was back in the days of desktop computers. Every so often I could hear this strange noise coming from the computer. I thought, what is going on there? And the desktop thing was actually not on my desktop. It was underneath my desk. And I looked underneath, and for those of the audience that are old enough to remember floppy disk drives in computers, when the floppy disk drive sparked up, there used to be a little LED light that would come on to indicate the disk had started. And the floppy disk light was coming on about every 15 seconds. So that the sound I could hear was actually the floppy drive spinning up and shutting down about every 15 seconds. I thought that's very weird. And it turned out that there was an autosave feature in the software that I was testing. And every time it tried to do the autosave, no matter where you'd set the autosave to actually save to on the disk, it would ping the floppy drive every time it did the autosave. So I could hear that little spinning up of the floppy every 15 seconds, even though I wasn't autosaving to the floppy. And that was only found because really the environment I was in, which was very quiet because there was no one around. And I just happened to observe that behaviour that we would have never have thought to written a test case cover that scenario, right? There was a test case to cover autosave, and it was autosaving in the correct place. But yeah, that could have caused problems eventually in probably just burning out floppy drives for no reason. But so it's a funny little bug. Probably not the most critical bug in the world, but it's one that I've certainly remembered.
All right. Thank you. Thanks, Lee, for answering that question beautifully. With that, let's move to other next question from Sharon. How do you recommend testers develop skills in order to be a good exploratory tester? Sharon from IBM.
Cool. So I guess that question points to, what makes a good exploratory tester. And so what kind of things should we be looking for to be good at exploring stuff? So I think there are a few things there. There's a natural curiosity, I guess. Like exploratory testing puts the tester in an interesting position if they've not been used to doing this before, in that they actually get to make a lot more choices for themselves about what they do. Like if you're not just following prescribed steps anymore, then you have a lot more freedom to, literally to explore. So if you're not used to doing that before, then that can be a challenge. So I think that natural curiosity and willingness to learn is important. Like a willingness to realize that there are lots of unknowns. Right? You're not going to know a lot of this stuff until you start exploring, and that's okay. And in fact, that's a really good thing. So not having to know the end result all the time is actually a good aspect of becoming a good exploratory tester. So some of the particular skills you're going to need are things, particularly things around working out what to test. Right? If you don't have that very prescribed direction about what to do, like how do you become good at working out what to do? So this is where heuristics come in really handy. If you're not familiar with that idea, I think of heuristics as just ways of helping me come up with test ideas. That's the ideas for things to test. I've learned pretty much everything I know about heuristics from Michael Bolton and James Bark, so I'm going to recommend people look at their work in that area. But looking at heuristics, so if you can become skilled at the application of heuristics, that's going to take you a long way in coming up with really good test ideas. And they also have this idea of oracles, right? So how do you know when you've actually found a problem? Again, if you're used to just having test cases that say, do this is meant to happen, it's pretty clear when there's a problem. But if you don't have that prescription anymore, then you need to become skilled at working out how you've actually found a problem. When you see something that indicates a problem, how do you know it's a problem? So again, lots of great resources from James and Michael about Oracle. So I'd encourage people to look at heuristics and oracles in particular. Other skills are things like note-taking. I think that's an underrated skill generally in the IT business, but particularly if you're an exploratory tester. It's going to be really important to work out how to take really good notes of what you're doing, because we always want a way to refer back to what we've been doing. So note taking is really important. Just a couple of things like note taking and learning about oracles and heuristics would be good places to start.
Right. Thank you. So, and I think you touched a very important point, Lee, here about note taking. And I think in exploratory way of approaching towards testing requires way larger, requirement. I mean, it's a huge scope of enhancing your writing skills and documentation skills, because the label and filtering process of what kind of notes you are taking at step one and up to where it is presentable to your stakeholders, right, that needs a lot of kind of practice, right? and notes not only in terms of textual. Maybe you can create videos and mind maps and all this stuff. So yeah, I think that's a phenomenal and that's a fantastic skill to learn when to be skilled in testing exploratory, because you're kind of refuting the notion of predefined scripts. So then people want to ask you, okay, if not predefined scripts, what you have to show.
Yeah. Yeah.
So
So,
thank you. Yeah.
So
right.
I think you touched on the most important point there is practice. So
Yeah.
particularly for people that are new for exploratory testing, that note taking, just getting the practice of doing writing their notes is there's probably no easy way to
Easier.
to get past that, but actually doing it. So my experience is that people just record way too much detail when they first start,
Mhm.
because they don't really understand what's important and what's not, and then have to filter stuff out. And there's a lot of context here too, of course. So I worked for a long time with testing teams in China, so I really didn't want them spending a lot of time writing lots of notes in English, because that was very time consuming for them to do that. So I moved to mind maps for those groups almost immediately, just so there were very small amounts of English text that they had to write. But I still got literally a picture of what they'd covered in any particular session of exploratory testing.
Okay. Good. Thank you. I hope, Sharon, this answered the questions. Next question, and I think it would be a tough one for you. Please be careful, Lee. It's from Paul, and Paul asks you, what do you think is the most deleterious misconception about exploratory testing?
All right. Thank you, Paul. That sounds like a Paul question. Yeah, I think there are so many misconceptions about exploratory testing, and none of them are going to be very helpful. But I think the one that is, well, this is only going to be my opinion, but the one that has sort of pushed the credibility of exploratory testing like down to a very low level in the minds of a lot of people in the industry is this idea that it is the same as just random interaction with the software, right? And I think so. I think in the mind of people that don't understand testing very well, that's a very common thing. That they say, "Oh, exploratory testing is just that random stuff." So they don't think it's a credible way of testing software. And even within the craft of software testing, a lot of people share that same opinion, I think, still, which is unfortunate, because good exploratory testing does have structure, and we do think about what we do, and we do, so we put this scope around things, we can charter things, we can plan what we're going to do. We're not just doing random stuff that is of low value. We're actually trying to do the opposite. We're trying to do very high value work in a very efficient way with exploratory testing. So I think that sort of conflation of exploratory testing is the same as just keyboard passion random testing has done a lot of damage to that term of exploratory testing. And I don't think as a group of professionals we've done a very good job of getting rid of that misconception either, unfortunately.
Yeah, I agree with you on that. I mean, and I think just to add, Lee, you correct me if I'm wrong, that some part is also played by tool vendors, right? Because most of the tools focuses on that predefined structure. You have a test case and you have this, and then you move on. And I think only few tools available in the market, I guess, who are starting a notion of exploratory testing in that, and having that session based test management charters and all that stuff integrated, so that, but how much and how many tools do that which are widely used in the market, that's a different thing. But yes, that's a pretty much bad misconception about exploratory testing, that it is
Well, yes, and plays into the hands of the vendors that want you to do testing in a way that fits in with the model they have for testing in their tool, right?
Right,
So,
right, right.
yes, that's it's unfortunate because
It's unfortunate.
I think those of us that have practiced exploratory testing to the point where we understand its power and value. It's a shame that many other people in our craft don't get the same chance to practice it as well, just because of this mindset that it's something that it's not.
Right. And let me push another question to you, Lee, which is from Alan Daniel. Please share the challenges you faced in exploratory testing.
Mm, that's a big question. So lots of challenges. Um, I'll just share a few that I can think of. Um, I guess the immediate ones follow on from the previous question. When you're in an environment where you have people that view exploratory testing as that random sort of low value type of testing that doesn't have much credibility, then you've got to rebuild that notion of what exploratory testing is to build its credibility back up again. And the only way you can do that, in my experience, is to actually lead by example and show it working really well and show it being done properly. So that's one challenge, is if you're just in an environment where people think it's not very good. Another environment I've certainly experienced is where there is an entrenched sort of model of testing, particularly based around, for example, as you just pointed to, Sandeep, like whether some vendor lock into a particular tool that kind of forces the way they do testing into this model that the tool happens to have. So which is commonly based around artifacts called test cases or test scripts or something, and they're munged together into test suites and test plans, and there's all this stuff around it that's what testing is to that organization, because that's the way it's modeled in the tooling that they choose to use. And then you come along and say, no, we're going to do this exploratory testing stuff, and we don't have test cases anymore, and it becomes a challenge then to sort of shoehorn what you want to do into that other model that they have. It's certainly possible to do that, and you can sort of reframe what a test case is as really a session of exploratory testing or something. So you can sort of shove things into the whatever management tool we're using, but that can be a problem in that the model is sort of entrenched in the tooling that they use, and that makes it difficult to do something that doesn't fit into their tooling. What else? I mean, oftentimes I've seen resistance from testers even to do exploratory testing, because they've been so conditioned by the environments that they've been in that if I'm not writing test cases and executing test cases, then I'm not doing proper testing. I can't report what I'm doing. I've got no evidence of what I'm doing. I'm not going to be able to do my performance review because I don't have all these things. So the resistance can come even from testers themselves. So that's a big. I've certainly experienced that as a challenge. And in environments like that, I think it's what we kind of talked about a little while ago. Is this, maybe you have to add on some of that to what they do ordinarily, and then sort of demonstrate how that works to them, and over time maybe they can sort of shift their thinking just by the fact that they practice it and understand the way it works. So there's lots of challenges here. It's a
I
very big
understand.
question, but yeah,
And
I think those sort of entrenched opinions about like traditional testing, whether that's like in the way it's managed or the tooling organizations use or what testers have been used to doing, all those things kind of sometimes can make it pretty challenging to penetrate that with some new idea. even though exploratory testing is not a new idea at all. But to those people, it feels like a new idea that doesn't fit with their worldview. So it's the same challenge as many others in getting people to shift their mindset a bit to take on a new idea.
Right. And I think if we tend to think deeply about these challenges, maybe trust factor from the organization, or let's say managers. Let's assume, okay, manager not as such in that, but the people or the group who is looking at overall governance of the testing, right? The test governance may not have that kind of education, or already in the conditioning that without test case it cannot happen. So, I mean, I think it's a, I'm not sure if it's a triangle or what, but it is something like trust, skills of a tester from the credibility standpoint, and something on the consistent demonstration side that, hey, even without these traditional models of test cases, if you trust us, give us time and the environment, we can show you all that stuff in the same way, and
Yeah,
forgetting those old models. So I think
yeah,
trust is also very important to show support to your team members, because you hired skilled testers, let's assume, and if you're not listening to them and imposing the models or the tools, not helpful.
yeah.
So
And you kind of pointed to something else there, in that a lot of the time that governance piece or management piece has been reliant on like reporting from testing being in a particular form, right? So that
exactly.
they've been used to having test case pass
Mhm.
fail rates or all this other stuff. So it's obviously a challenge for you to say we're not going to do that stuff anymore. We're going to give you this stuff instead. So again, sometimes you just have to sort of shoehorn what you want to do into the thing they already have for a while, until you do build up that trust that you're actually doing a good job without the things that they're familiar with.
Right, right. uh, on the notes, Lee, there is a question from Sharon, and I'm putting on the stage. How do you take good notes of your testing sessions?
Yeah, so I guess this comes back a little bit to a question we had previously. So I don't think there's one way to take notes for testing sessions. I am a fan of using mind maps for note taking, just because it gives you that structure and visual representation of things. So I do encourage people to use mind maps a lot in exploratory testing. If mind maps are not your thing, you can use something else. As I said, I think when people first start doing this, they tend to over detail the things that they include in their notes. So it is that practice that gets you to a point where your notes have enough detail for someone else to understand what you did, but without having so much detail that it just takes so long to write the notes, and it's actually very difficult for someone else to review because there's just too much detail there. So I think getting to that point where you've got enough detail that it's reviewable, it's debriefable by someone, but without having all that noise of detail is a practice thing. I don't have any magic sort of tricks to that,
Yeah, yeah,
but
I understand.
it's I think one of my metrics used to be, if it takes you longer to write the notes than you actually spend doing the testing in a session, then you're probably writing too many notes.
Right, right. And I think it comes to the same thing. We talked about the practice aspect of it. And consistently getting feedback and evaluating where your time is going. Is it more on notes or testing, and
Yeah,
after which what is happening in the production, for example,
yeah,
right?
and in session-based test management, like they do have this notion of debriefing. So when you get
Yes.
to the end of the session, you actually debrief what you did with another tester or a test lead or someone. So that's a way of sort of learning that level of detail in your notes too. Like if your notes are constantly sort of not good enough to enable someone else to understand what you did, then you're probably lacking some detail. If the notes are so extensive that it takes someone too long to actually understand what you did, then there's
Hmm.
too much. So it's the debrief can sort of act as a bit of a measure there too to decide whether your level of detail is right or not.
Right. Next question for you, Lee. I think it's an interesting question. How can, and it's from Deshik S. How can exploratory testing be integrated into an agile development process? And what are some best practices for ensuring that it is successful and efficient?
Well, yeah, another big question. So, in terms of integrating exploratory testing into an agile development process, I happen to think that exploratory testing is ideal for the faster pace of an agile development approach. So, yeah, I think we talked about this a little bit before as well. You suppose we're in some Scrum-like environment where we're based on user stories, relatively small scope stories that are designed to be delivered within a fairly short time frame within a sprint, so maybe 2 or 3 weeks. So we have this very rapid feedback cycle. So we really need a testing approach that can sort of meet that requirement to have a rapid feedback cycle. So we don't want an approach that's requires lots of overhead. Agile is all about we don't want to over document things. We just want enough to have some credibility around the process. So I think exploratory testing fits in very well because we're not going to be too heavyweight in terms of the process and the way we document it. So we can actually fit the testing we need to do either alongside or at least within the sprint. So we can integrate the test effort as part of the sprint rather than it lagging into a separate sprint or something. Whereas if you had a more sort of traditional process, you might end up with a lot of time spent planning and documenting what you're going to do in the testing, but actually not managing to do the testing within the sprint because there's too much other stuff there that gets in the way. So I think exploratory testing works very well in Agile. It's what I've been doing for, I don't know, 10 or 15 years in teams. It seems to work pretty well. You don't really want, a lot of Agile teams maybe don't have testers at all, of course. Or if they do, they're going to be very small numbers of teams embedded, a small number of testers embedded within a Scrum team. So you really want their time to be spent interacting with software and really testing rather than writing about what they're going to test. So I think it fits in very well. I would encourage people to do that. And in terms of best practices, well, I'm not a best practices kind of guy, but one of the ways as I've indicated before, is session-based test management. I think that it does give you some efficiency. It's a very lightweight way of managing your test effort. Exploratory testing slots very easily into that approach to managing testing, and I think that's as good a way as I've seen of managing exploratory testing within an agile development process of some sort. So I'd encourage people to look into that. There's plenty of articles written in various testing magazines and so on about how people have applied session-based test management in agile teams, and that would be as much of a best practice recommendation as I could make, I think.
Awesome. Thanks. I hope Deshik, Lee answered your question to a very good, reasonable extent, I would say. If we keep aside the best practice part, I think he conveyed the message, Lee, you conveyed the message that if you have your session-based test management, if you have your charters in place, if you are doing debriefing, and I think it's about the team's readiness to accept the exploratory testing approach with session-based test management, understanding of charters, how the debriefing happens, how notes are taken, what data is presented, and how to use that data to, or the information to execute next set of charters, right? And starting next session, I think that these are some practices that testers should adopt, and continuously evaluating what is happening, what is the overall, emotions and overall feedback from the team, and at the end of the day, what is the feedback from the production.
Yep.
So that will help in, tuning, refining, deprecating, appreciating some practices. Maybe that is your best practices that may not fit some other team for their best practices.
Oh, for sure. And if one of the key sort of tenets in agile teams is this idea of retrospective, right? So we do deliberately take a look at
Exactly.
what we've been doing ideally every sprint, right? So
Right. So
and it's important to recognise that the retrospective shouldn't just be about the development work; it should be about the testing work too. So
exactly.
we've been trying this thing, we've been doing debriefing and note taking, all this stuff. Like, how are we going with that? Where can we improve it? And just taking the opportunity to try new things in each sprint to get better at that. So, as you say, so you sort of build up this like context-specific, team-specific best practice around the way you do testing.
Okay, next question. The question is from Abhinaya Ajit Kumar. And this question reminds me of a classical old question: can anyone do testing? It's on the similar lines: can anyone do the exploratory testing? Who is familiar with the application? So, what's your thoughts on this, Lee?
Yeah, so this is kind of, this crosses a few different things. So I think it does come to your point there that we've often been asked, can anyone test, right? Can developers test? Can anyone test? And my answer to that is yes, anyone can test, but it's the same as lots of other things. Like, can anyone paint your house or whatever, right? Like, most people can do these things, but it's the level of skill that we should be concerned about, right? So if we want very high quality skill testing of the applications we're working on, then we probably need appropriately skilled and experienced people to do that work, right? Just the same as development work. It's there's a reason we have specialties, right? So that people become
Right, right,
very
right.
highly skilled and knowledgeable in the thing that they become specialist in. So it is one of the, again, this is coming back to Paul's question. I think one of the misconceptions is that as soon as we put exploratory in there, it means that anyone can do it. And to some extent that's true, but again, I think it boils down to the sort of skill level.
Right, right.
Sort of dictates the outcomes that you're going to get. Like, if you want very good quality testing, then you probably need someone that's skilled in testing. In this case, maybe the question is more about, is exploratory testing more tuned to people that are very familiar with the application? So, for example, a business user, would they make a good exploratory tester because they know the application very well? And maybe that's the case, but if you're looking for deep testing skills, then I think you still need people who understand and have that knowledge of what the testing skills actually are.
Right, right, right.
And it's certainly possible to leverage the skills of people who are familiar with your application, like people from support or in the business domain that really understand your application very well. They understand how the users interact with your application. Like, they can certainly give you great feedback on the product as well, I think. But there's some danger in saying that just because we call it exploratory testing, then suddenly anyone can do it to the same
Right.
level as a skilled tester would. Because
Right,
I don't think that's the case.
right. I think the journey is from anyone to someone, right? So anyone can jump, but if that's anyone is not trained properly, not skilled, and until that person reaches to this level of someone, it's hard, and it's harmful to say that can anyone do the exploratory testing? Maybe, but what is the value? And what is the cost for that anyone to be in the team and doing something? So if the cost and value is properly evaluated, maybe anyone can do. But why don't you do cost lower and value high by turning that anyone into someone? And for that, as you mentioned, that scale, the professionalism, understanding. So, I mean, it's we are opening the can of worms by answering this question, but it contains a lot of thing, and it also goes to the notion of quality. Because if Lee is the CEO, or let's say CIO, and saying, "Oh, anyone can do exploratory testing," I would want to ask, "What do you know about exploratory testing? What do you know about testing? Why are you saying so? What is the hypothesis or assumptions or the premise behind this statement?" So I think, Abhinay, I think it answered the question that anyone maybe should know, and you should be a someone to do this, because you know uh, testing is challenging. So
Yes.
all right, so we are like 5 minutes above, and I think you have answered early. There is one question, and I think you should answer that, Lee, if you
Okay.
want to. It's from Abhinay once again, and it's an interesting question. Can we automate the exploratory testing? If not, may I know the reason?
Gee, you should have put this question first, then I'd have a whole hour to answer it. Well, again, I would refer to sort of the way I think about what exploratory testing is, and really it's an approach to software testing that is deeply human. And the reason it's deeply human is because it relies on human skills, right? So we're looking at like learning about the product. We're literally exploring, we're experimenting and evaluating, trying to model what the product looks like, asking questions about it, making observations about it, observations that we didn't know we needed to make until we did something through the course of our exploration. So I think all of those deeply human aspects of exploratory testing make it impossible to automate, because if we were going to automate it, then obviously we would need to inform the computer about what it was meant to do at every step. And when we're exploring, we literally don't know. We're gonna follow a path, and then we're gonna make some observations, and we're gonna learn some stuff along the way. And then what we do next is going to be informed by what we've observed and learned. And that's not what we can program into a computer, right? We can automate lots of checks of known facts in a piece of software, and that's a useful tactic within testing, but we can't automate the deeply human aspects that exploratory testing requires, because the machines are just not capable of doing that. So like, I'm not anti-automation. I'm saying that we need to like leverage the machines to do the things they're really good at and can help us, but we also need to leverage the humans to do the things that they're really good at. And this sort of exploratory experimentation, evaluation, observation kind of activities are things that are very human in nature, so require us to use humans to do, and that's cool. It's having this mix of the humans and the machines to get us to a good mix of the way we do the test effort. So hopefully that explains why I don't think we can automate exploratory testing.
Right. And I think it adds to the the other layer of test, where say the experimentation part, the observation and evaluation. Maybe when you're exploring a product, right? Maybe to find its limits, or maybe find some special characteristics, when you want to do an experiment, you can deploy a tool for sure. You can automate, how much test data in certain field it can accept. Use automation to do something about it, maybe simulate some user behavior. But that is part of the entire test effort and
Yeah.
exploration. you
Yes.
know it's like Australia versus America finding out. So did you automate the entire process? No, but maybe use ships rather
Yeah.
than swimming, or rather than anything else. You use
Yes.
ships and use
Yeah.
compass to get the direction. So certain pieces can be automated to
Yes.
find some information, and then building on that, on the top of that, and
Sure.
move on.
Yep. No,
Right.
there's nothing here to say we can't use tools to help us, right?
Yeah. So
There's no point like labeling ourselves when we can use a tool to do something.
yeah,
And the
exactly.
tools can extend our capabilities in a lot of ways, right?
Exactly. A lot
Um,
of ways. A lot of ways. Yep.
but they're not going to replace some of these deeply human skills that are required to do good exploratory testing.
Exactly. All right. With that, I think we have answered most of the questions. Cool. And thank you very much, Lee. I think we are like 10 minutes over, almost 10 minutes over now.
No worries. It's all good.
I hope this session had been useful for everyone who is here.
Yeah, thanks for the great questions. That's good.
Yeah, there were some great questions, especially on, can anyone do the exploratory testing? What about the automation aspect of it? And what is the bug, and what challenges you faced, and how to do integrate in agile? So I think questions from different fields and different people and different perspective are coming. And thank you very much, Lee, for providing insightful answers for those. Thanks a lot. Thank you very much for
No worries.
being
Thank
here
you.
with us. And thanks
No
everyone
worries.
who joined today. Have a good time. Bye bye.
Thanks, everyone. Bye-bye.